Hello there! The purpose of this video is to help you move from taking the standard and turning it into learning objectives. So they aren't actually the same thing, right? The standards are pretty complex, they're all tangly, and we want the learning objectives to be clear and simple in student-centered language because we're going to reference those as we move throughout the lesson plan and the unit. So how do we move from these complex, tangly standards to simple, easy to understand, easy to measure learning objectives? So the first thing we want to do is spend some good quality time with those standards, okay? So we want to spend some time deconstructing and breaking down the standards. Here's an example of a standard for, I believe, 11 through 12 for the Missouri MLS, Missouri Learning Standards, which are basically a redo of the Common Core standards for, this is for informational text, okay? So this would be reading information RI 11-12. Evaluate an author's argument and reasoning for effectiveness, validity, logic, credibility, and relevance of the evidence. Like, holy cow, right? There's a lot in there. So the first thing you want to do is identify any verbs. And those verbs are going to be from Bloom's taxonomy. What are students being asked to actually do? So take your standards that you're using for your lesson plan, circle or highlight the verbs. Some of them have several verbs in there, so don't just stop when you find one. So students are being asked to evaluate, okay? And that's really, really important to understand the standard. And then evaluate what? So evaluate the argument and the reasoning of a text, of a nonfiction text, right, of an argumentative text. And those are really two different things as well, the overall argument and then the reasoning they use to support that argument. And then there's a little bit of sort of qualifier for what, right? I evaluate an argument for what? Effectiveness, validity, logic, credibility, and relevance of the evidence. So you want to spend some time sort of annotating those standards, especially looking for verbs and nouns. So the verb is evaluate and the noun is the author's argument and their reasoning for effectiveness, validity. Those are all actually nouns, right? So will you spend some quality time breaking them down? Look out for smushed standards, okay? So one thing that happened, the Common Core has some what I call smushed standards, but when Missouri decided we did not want the Common Core and we wanted to form our own standards, we still basically use the Common Core, but one thing we did on some of these standards is smushed. So sometimes the Common Core has two standards. Missouri took those two and smushed them together. I'm not sure that was a valuable use of our time and resources personally, but and it makes it a little more difficult too because these standards have so much packed into them. In other places, we split standards into two. So it's kind of interesting to think about when we thought we should smush and when we thought we should split. But so take a look at this standard. It's a Missouri Learning Standard. Determine two or more themes in a text. Analyze their development throughout the text. Relate the themes to human nature and the world. Provide an objective and concise summary of the text. What is that doing on the end of that? Providing a summary of the text to me is a completely different skill from determining theme, but this is a smushed standard, okay? So one thing I want you to know about smushed standards is if you choose this standard for your lesson plan, you do not have to cover every single thing in this standard. If you choose a standard, you can choose any part of it to focus on at any particular time. You do not need to do all of it. So for example, if you are reading a text and only focusing on a summary, it's still standards-based. You can do this other stuff, the other parts of the standard at a later time or whatever, right? So you do not have to do every single thing in the standard. You can pick and choose. You may not always determine two or more themes, but there's no MLS standard for 11 through 12 that says find one theme, but you don't always have to look for two. So even though the standard says determine two or more things, you can choose your learning objective to be determine a theme of a text, okay? So you are allowed to simplify the standards and you do not have to do every single thing the standard says just because that is the standard you are linking your lesson plan to. So we're going to work with this one. Evaluate how the author's word choices and use of syntax contribute to the text's overall meaning, tone, and aesthetic impact. I'm going to de-smush this. So evaluate is my verb. I have started by highlighting that. How the author's word choices and use of syntax. Well, I'm only going to focus on word choice for the particular text I have in mind. I'm not going to focus on syntax. I'm going to do that later with a different text, okay? So I'm unsmushing that. And then I don't want to talk about meaning, tone, and aesthetic impact right now. I'm going to focus on tone because I don't think my students really have a firm grasp on tone. I don't want to add in all that extra stuff as one of my key focuses. Now, we might also talk about aesthetic impact by, how does this help make it beautiful? But that's not my key focus. So I am simplifying and unsmushing. I'm taking the standard and I'm picking what I'm going to focus on from that standard. So here's my simplified version of the standard down here. Evaluate how the author's word choice contributes to the text's overall tone, okay? Now, this could become an objective, but what I want you to think about is where on Bloom's taxonomy does the verb in the standard fall? So evaluate is a very higher order thinking verb. It is a very complex type of thought to evaluate something. So I recommend the stair-stepped approach where your objectives build up to evaluation. I would never just slap on the board, evaluate how word choice contributes to tone without some supporting standards leading up to that. So let's take a look. Here's my simplified standard again on top. Evaluate how the author's word choice contributes to the text's overall tone. I'm going to pull up Bloom's taxonomy so you can see that evaluate. Oh, here it is. Evaluate is on the highest order thinking, okay? I really recommend that you include, I like 3. Sometimes 2 is enough if you have like analyze as your main verb, maybe just 1 leading you up to that. I like 3 as a general rule because sometimes I like to even move beyond the standard to get to interpret, judge, or whatever. I would choose 1 skill from down here that helps students get to evaluation. Does that make sense? And then maybe 1 from the middle that leads them toward evaluation. So let me show you what that might look like. Here we go. Before students can evaluate tone, I need to make sure they know what tone is, right? And although they've been learning it since like 4th or 5th grade, they need a refresher. I guarantee they need a refresher. You might even need a refresher when you see this, like, oh, can I actually define verbally without looking it up what a text's tone is? It's actually something that stumps a lot of people. So I want to make sure I teach them what tone is, and I need them to just be able to say what tone means. And define is all the way down here. It's pretty low on Bloom's taxonomy because it's just sort of recall, state, repeat type of stuff, right? I also want them to know some verbs we can use, or some adjectives, we can use to describe tone. Oh, this author seems angry about the topic they're talking about. This author seems enthusiastic about the topic or passionate, right? So I want them to have some of those words available. So list 3 examples of different words to describe tone. Notice I have that 3 examples, so that makes it just extra measurable, and we like our objectives to be something that we could measure, especially when they're in that lower level of Bloom's taxonomy. Then going up, we could identify phrases in a text that contribute to tone. So before we can evaluate how key phrases contribute to tone, they need to be able to find key phrases in the text that have tone within them, right? So we're looking for, in this whole text, where is tone coming through strongest? Analyze key phrases to determine tone. So, looking at all these key phrases where we see the tone is coming through, they seem a little angry. They seem kind of defensive. They seem really optimistic, right? So analyze how those key phrases determine tone. And then I can use the key verb from the standard, that higher level verb. Now, I would not list all of these on the board. I would not include all of these in my lesson plan. I would choose a lower level, maybe choose a mid-level, and then use the actual verb of the standard as my arrival place. Because this standard has the highest level verb available. So if it's a medium level verb, maybe you only need 1 leading up to it, if that makes sense. So I want to see on your lesson plans this sort of stair-stepped approach. That requires a lot of critical thinking. Before students can do this, what do I want them to be able, or what will they need to be able to do? Oftentimes it's define or explain what it even means, give some examples of it, be able to find it in the text. So I almost always have an identify as my middle one. So if they're analyzing the impact of figurative language, they have to be able to identify figurative language. before in the text. Before that, they have to be able to understand what figurative language is or define figurative language, right? So you can sort of work backwards or just start with define, explain, some of those lower level verbs. And then we got to write those learning objectives. How do we actually do that, right? So this might be helpful to you, the A, B, C, D. I didn't invent it, but we talk about it when we talk about how to write the actual objective. A is a reminder to include the audience. Students will be able to. Some teachers, some districts want them phrased in first person. I will be able to. For me, I prefer students will be able to. When you get to assessment with Miss Binder or in Dr. Brewer's class or whomever else, or when you get to student teaching, they may prefer that you use first person. I will be able to. But for me, students will be able to. Behavior then, what will they be able to do? That's your verb and your noun. Evaluate, tone, right? And then, a little more than that so they know what you're talking about. Conditions are how will it be done. So you could include, for example, on a Venn diagram, that might be a condition, or in a paragraph, that could be a condition as well. So that would be if you have a very specific sort of product or condition under which they will be doing this. And then a degree is how many or to what extent, and that's going to be a little more mathematical or something that's super measurable to do. So in a paragraph, students will identify 3 types of figurative language and evaluate how they contribute to tone, right? And that in itself is a little tangly, so you might want to split that up a bit. But so the degree here, you can see at least 2 of their actions. So given a diagram of the eye, that's a condition. How will it be done? Students are the audience, so students will be able, missing the word to here, to label, and that is a lower level because it's based on just identifying. Label the 9 muscles, and describe, we have another verb embedded in there. At least 2 is the degree of their actions. So that's a really nice standard. So here we go. Taking the tone example, and this is one of the lower level examples, we've got students will be able to, that's the audience. The behavior is list 3 examples. So list is my verb, 3 examples is my my noun of different words to describe tone. That's part of the noun, the words to list 3 words. 3 examples is the degree or the extent. So I included 3 examples because I don't want them to just say, oh, they could be happy, they could be sad. I want them to get a little more complex than that. And then conditions might be, for this one, it doesn't really apply, but it could be like after reading a text or on a graphic organizer. In a paragraph, students will be able to list 3 examples, something like that, right? So those are the steps for actually writing the learning objective. Of course, it all starts with spending quality time with those standards, finding the verb, finding the nouns, choosing the part of the standard that you're focusing on for this particular text, if necessary, if it's one of these smushed or tangly standards, and then breaking it down so that you're identifying the skills necessary to get to that higher level of standard, building those step aspects of the standard so that you're leading students toward that deeper level thinking, making sure they have the necessary skills to get there. Let me know if you have any questions. We will be workshopping, we'll be doing drafting, we'll be working on this together in lots of different steps, so you'll get feedback all along the way. You will also learn a lot more about this. It's sort of a brief introduction because when you are in the assessment class, which comes right before student teaching, if you're not there yet in your sequence, it's coming for you soon. And in that class, you spend a lot of time doing this and you'll be experts by then. You don't have to be an expert yet. We're practicing for now. So that's a sort of coaching at this point, getting you some early exposure to these concepts if you're not familiar with them yet. Let me know if you need anything. Have a great day.